Hey guys, iKailaKai, Kai here. What is the value of life? When playing the One Piece card game, each and every single attack requires a decision to make. Do you counter that attack, or do you take the damage? This is a decision that you're going to be making hundreds of times over the course of a single game day, making it one of, if not the most important skills you have to learn if you want to become good at the One Piece card game. If you ever feel like you're unsure if you should be countering an attack or taking the damage, this is the video for you, and I hope that you're going to learn something new, even if you've been playing the game for quite a while. Welcome to How to Counter in the One Piece card game.
Now let me tell you a little story. I came home recently and I decided that the next day I really wanted to stream. But then I realized that my old browser that I used to use on this computer doesn't have a video pop-up feature nor a split screen feature. But also I was thinking, switching over right now 10 minutes before I want to start my stream, that's kind of a pain, isn't it? Well, no, it isn't, because OperaGX, the sponsor of this video, makes it extremely easy to switch over. In the synchronization settings, I can instantly and in one click import all of my bookmarks and browsing history into my new browser, meaning that I don't have to type in twitter.com or youtube.com the first time to make sure that my browser remembers what I'm actually looking for when I just type Y. Everything was instantly set up in 10 minutes and I was ready to stream immediately. Because I was able to get it going so quickly, I was able to use things like that split screen feature, which I've become so used to now, on stream as a really useful tool to help compare two different statistics. Oh, these are flagship battle stats. Let's compare this actually. Let me do something cool here. So with the split screen settings, with the OperaGX browser, you look at the play rates of the decks at this tournament, the Bandai Card Game Fest, and we could also look at the flagship play rate. And then after my stream finished, of course, I decided to go back and do some of the more fun things like changing my cursor, my background, even the background music or the keyboard sounds to make the browser feel a little bit more cozy and a little bit more me. This entire process from start to finish before I wanted to start streaming and those small customizations didn't even take 20 minutes to get everything done. And that's how easy it is to switch over your browser and start using some of these excellent features alongside so many more features that you can only find in the OperaGX browser. Stop using your browser today, switch over to OperaGX in my link in the description and the pinned comment below.
Thank you so much for sponsoring a small content creator like me, and let's get back into the video. An attack can go into your life or your characters, but let's first start with what happens when the attack goes into your leader. When the opponent attacks your leader, you can either choose to take one damage or counter the attack. If you choose not to counter the attack and let it through to your leader, once the battle is fully resolved, you are left with one less card in life, but one more card in hand. If instead of letting the attack through, you decide to counter with the card's counter stat as shown on the left-hand side of some character cards, you are left with the same number of cards in your life, but fewer cards in hand. Both sides of this coin, taking the attack or countering it, have its merits and demerits built into it fundamentally, and therefore this decision is as important as it is difficult to make. Understanding the value of these components is imperative when making the decision of if, when, and how you should be countering an attack. And importantly, regardless of the size of the attack, you're always only going to be taking one damage, unless, of course, the character attacking has double attack. Whether you decide to let through a 5,000 power attack or a 12,000 power attack, you only take one damage. Therefore, your first instinct is to counter any attack that's 5,000 power. But this isn't always true. One of the most important concepts I would like to introduce is the scaling value of life. If you've played a fair number of games, you may notice that people take the first attack of their life very often, regardless of if it's a low 5,000 power attack. Why is this? It's because generally the value of each life card scales with the length of the game. To fully explain this layered concept, we have to explain a few other concepts that also supplement your decision in countering. In the early game, the board starts empty and both players need to build up their board to fight alongside their leader later on. Because they're developing their board and optimally using most, if not all of their dung cards to do so, a concept called playing on curve, that means that they have less dung to allocate to their leader and increase its power. Not only this, but the characters that are played in the first couple of turns are much weaker than the cards that come out later, meaning that throughout the game, the opponent is going to be hitting you at 5,000 or 6,000 a lot. If you counter all of these attacks from the beginning of the game, not only are you expending your resources and thinning your options, but eventually you're going to run out. And once you run out, that 5,000 power attack is going to go through to your leader. If you're going to take one of these smaller hits at some point, you might as well take it as early as possible. On top of this logic, there's other clear benefits to taking your first life, as having more cards in hand not only has the virtue of providing you with more options and with more counter potentially to be able to protect your board, it also increases your odds of finding a specific card that you're looking for with that extra card drawn from your life. You may think that the odds of finding one specific card in your life is rather low. However, in the early game, when you've only seen a few select cards within your deck, any extra draws are going to increase your odds of finding that card by a quite large magnitude. When a game starts, you have 5 cards in your hand, drawing 1 card at the start of each turn, excluding the first turn of the player going first. Say that you're going second and you're looking for the 4-cost Cavendish that you run 4 copies of by turn 2 where you aim to play it. You in fact have a 35.3% chance of having at least one of that exact card in your starting hand, disregarding the mulligan. The mulligan is a whole other topic which is also extremely important, so if you are unsure about this topic, you want to see me make a video on that, make sure to let me know in the comments below. And while you're down there, actually, consider subscribing, because I'm trying to reach 33,000 subscribers to go full-time on YouTube. And then maybe I can get a better background than this brick wall. As you'll draw a card at the start of your turn on turn 1 and turn 2 going second, you will look at a total of 7 cards. What do you think your odds of finding that Cavendish is? Though you may not expect it to differ all too much from that initial 35.3%, it's actually 46.4%. Drawing 2 cards increase your odds of finding this Cavendish by over 10%. But wait, the person going first has the ability to attack your leader on their second turn. With this in mind, we have the potential to draw 3 cards before this forlorn turn. So, looking at 8 out of 50 cards in our deck, the odds of finding one specific card we run at 4 copies is, surprisingly, 51.4%. Just being able to see 1 extra card in the early game substantially increases your odds of finding the card that you're looking for. And even if you don't find that specific card, it does give you a couple of other options regardless. In this example, we talked about the first life, but this can extend to other life cards as well. If you're desperately trying to find a single card, overextending and overtaking your life to find that one single card is something that you can consider. Though the individual odds of that single card in your life being the exact card you need is rather low, if there's a chance that you can find it and that card will give you substantial advantage, you should take statistics into account and increase your odds of winning by any means necessary. Whether it's your first life, second, third, or even in some desperate circumstances, even lower life, if you're missing a certain card from your standard curve, you can ask yourself the question, is being more fragile and getting closer to losing worth finding this one specific card? This is going to really come down to the matchup as well as your deck, because you can think about it like this. If you don't find this one specific card, then your chances of winning become 0%. But even if it's a 3 to 5% chance of finding that card from that one draw, you now have a small chance of winning. And if from your life you don't manage to find that card, well, you would have lost anyways, so no harm, no foul. And then if you manage to find that card, well, now you can start to mount your comeback. But taking more life desperately, your second, third, in more desperate cases, your 4th or 5th life, can feel really scary because the value of each life card increases with the length of the game. We're back here. But really, from these two concepts, I hope that I've made a good argument for why taking your life in the early game is actually beneficial. Having more cards in your hands increases your options and, of course, increases your odds of finding specific cards that you need, while also giving you more sufficient counter to be able to protect both your life and your board later on. But in the late game, when people start to accumulate more and more dong at their disposal, what ends up happening? The characters you play are bigger and the attacks are stronger. When you're attacked at 5,000 or 6,000 power as a 5,000 power leader, you can counter this attack with 1 card. A card with plus 1,000 counter will suffice for a 5,000 power attack, and a 2k counter will protect you from a 6,000 power attack. This is why when you're looking to crack the opponent's life, it's smart to attack in increments of 2,000 over the opponent's leader, such as 7,000 or 9,000, as it would require 2 or 3 cards to protect if you don't have counter events. Also note that you can use a 2,000 counter on a 5,000 power attack, and you can use 2 1,000 counters on a 6,000 power attack, even if it feels a little bit bad, because sometimes having that 1 extra life is more valuable than the efficiency of your counter. In the late game, these larger 7,000 or 9,000 power attacks become much easier to make and therefore are much harder to defend against. The best way to defend against them is with your life, because whether you decide to let through a 5,000 power attack or a 12,000 power attack, you only take 1 damage. Woo! Double callback. Because the damage scales into the late game, so does the value of each life card. Rather than expending 3 cards from your hand to defend a 9,000 power attack, you can instead draw 1 card from your life. But you can't do this forever unless you're a yellow deck designed to heal infinitely. Once you get lower and lower in life, your opponent simply needs to make their attacks bigger and bigger to force you to counter out of an attack from hand eventually. And once you're not able to, you lose.
And that's all the game is at the end of the day. It's not necessarily about how many life cards you have, but rather if you have the counter in your hand to be able to defend that last blow. Staying healthy doesn't always mean having a high life total, but more often means having more counter in your hand to not only be able to protect your life, but also be able to protect your characters, who are going to be the ones that are actually going to help you win the game in the end rather than just survive it. So really, countering is an extremely complicated topic that you can't fully explain in a YouTube video. And as such, there are still going to be a lot of decisions where you aren't sure if you should take or counter an attack. So therefore, a general rule of thumb, a sort of cheat sheet for people who aren't all too sure in the early game, especially when they're starting to play this game, is to do as follows. Generally, you should feel safe to take the first 1 to 2 attacks to your leader and gain those extra cards to your hand. But after that point, you don't want to go all too low, so therefore, any attacks that can be countered with 1 card, whether it's a 5,000 power attack or a 6,000 power attack to be able to counter with 1k or 2k, consider countering these cards because it's going to be the cheapest attacks to counter, therefore keeping your hand healthy and also giving you more options in the early game. And while this doesn't fully pertain to the concept of countering, it is something that I just want to mention in this video anyways because we're close to this topic, and that is that when you win the game, you don't need to blow your opponent out of the water and make so they never had a chance to win. You just need to win by 1 turn. Being efficient with your counter and your life total is going to be able to give you enough time to be able to go for lethal on your own turns rather than when you feel like you've run out of time and are forced to go for lethal. Therefore, when the opponent goes, man, I had lethal next turn, so close, GG man, you can respond in a very natural way with,
on turn 3 you searched Dead Man's Game. You chose not to leave up any dong at any point in this game, which means you were looking to go for lethal using this card. Knowing the risk of the game going on too long, I attacked your life to put you on a clock, forcing you to go for lethal last turn rather than the next turn. If you attached all of your dong and tried to go for lethal, you would have 4 attacks which would swing at 9, 10, 10, and 11k, which I could easily defend with 2 blocks, 1 life, and 1 counter. But that is, well, if you didn't have Dead Man's Game. Dead Man's Game would rest my blockers, forcing me to counter 3 attacks out of hand, absorbing only 1 with my life. I calculated that my current hand could only defend 2 attacks, so I added a blocker to the board, making my total number of blockers 3, mathematically ensuring that there was no way for you to win. You were never 1 turn away from winning. You were always 1 turn behind, and your clock has run out. Your defeat was written long ago.
And so what about when you go to characters? Defending a character that's on your board has very similar mechanics to defending your life, having similar merits and demerits. So therefore, I won't repeat myself once again. You can extrapolate the points before when it comes to protecting characters. However, when it comes to protecting characters, there is one question that you should be asking yourself, and that is protecting this character going to end up threatening more counter from the opponent than it would cost me to protect it? This is what I mean by that.
If the opponent is hitting for 6,000 into your 6,000 power character and you recognize they only have 1 attack, you can ensure its safety with only 1,000 counter. The next turn, if you hit with this 6,000 power character into the opponent's 5,000 power leader, you are requiring the opponent to use 2,000 counter or else they take 1 damage. The survival of this character required less counter than it threatened to the opponent, so therefore keeping this character alive was a pretty good trade deal. In this scenario, we got our value back immediately, but you can also recoup this value over the course of multiple turns as the attacks compound as well. If on the other hand, the opponent has made their leader 7,000 power even on your turn thanks to a card like Law and Beppo, decides to hit your 5,000 power character, you'll need to spend 3,000 counter to defend it on this turn. If you don't manage to recoup that 3,000 counter worth of value back from the opponent over the course of the game, then protecting that character was a mistake, giving your opponent more value. And in particular, in this situation, because the opponent's leader is at 7,000 power, unless this character is going to survive for several turns, or you for some reason are going to hit for 10,000 power with this character next turn, there's very little reason to actually keep this character on the board.
This is the general logic tree when it comes to countering, especially in the early game, but there is a late game exception to this.
If you need to end the game urgently, the opponent is likely going to try to take out your characters to extinguish your chances of winning. If they hit your 9,000 power character with 15,000 power requiring 7,000 power to protect, you may still actually want to protect it if you need to go for lethal on the next turn. Even if that 9,000 power character won't threaten over 7,000 power themselves, the number of attacks on your board is crucial to creating lethal in some situations. It's for this reason that even if it's a bad trade deal, if it's your only chance of winning the game, you sometimes have to lose the battle to win the war.
This is the ground for countering within the One Piece card game, and although there are some small, complex, and difficult decisions that you need to make at each and every turn, there's one question that you should ask yourself every time to see if you've made the correct decision, and that is, why?
Tell me specifically, think that you're talking to me. Why did you decide to counter that attack? Why did you decide to take that life? Why did you keep that character on the board? And if you can't explain exactly why you chose to make that decision, that means that you made that decision mindlessly. And so even if it was the wrong decision, even if you were supposed to keep that character on the board, but you let it go because of some certain logic that you had, the importance is having that logic to begin with, because then you can iterate upon it and learn. If you're not thinking, then you can't start to improve. So if anything, just keep asking yourself, why did you make that decision on each and every turn in this game, and make sure that you can actually answer it. Oh, and there is one more extraneous circumstance that I want to talk about within this video. A huge motif in this video was the scaling value of life as the game goes on. This is largely because in the early game, there's going to be lots of smaller, closer to 5,000 power attacks that you're going to have to deal with, and therefore to have enough counter in the early game and also have options, you should be taking your life early game. But in the late game, the attacks are going to become larger, and therefore it's going to be more valuable to absorb those attacks with your life. However, some decks don't actually play by these rules. This will require some higher level understanding of specifically what deck you're playing and how it's going to interact with the deck that you're playing against, but this is an example of that. An aggro deck like Red Zoro back in the day had characters mostly in the 5,000 power range. This aggro deck wanted to win by whittling your hand with small 5,000 to 6,000 power attacks rather than larger attacks. This meant that even if you went to lower life, the power of Zoro's attacks didn't actually get substantially larger. It's for this reason that you could take your life down to 1 very early on to maximize the number of options in your hand and counter efficiently later on. We can actually see this being done in a different matchup on the biggest stage in the 2025 World Championship Finals, where Japan's WF on Shanks was taking on China's Abao on Lucci. If you played back in the day, it's no secret that Shanks absolutely gets destroyed by Lucci. But WF, being both a Shanks main and a Lucci main historically, knew exactly how to play out this matchup. Due to Shanks' leader effect, he's rather weak to 6,000 power attacks, and Abao, knowing this, decided that he's going to play into that game plan, starting with playing the 4-cost Lucci on 4 Dong just to line up a 6,000 power body on the board. He continues this game plan, starts to put on the pressure with 6,000 from the Lucci as well as leader. However, WF takes both of these hits, going down to 3 life very early on. Shanks clears one of the opponent's characters next turn to try to stem some of the aggression that he can behold, but Abao decides to exploit the fact that WF didn't counter any of the attacks the turn before by making his attacks larger, hitting now at 7,000 and 8,000, just like we talked about before, making the attacks bigger to force your opponent to counter out in undesirable ways. However, WF takes both of these attacks again, now going down to 1 life on his 9 Dong turn, but with 11 cards in hand. The reason why he's taking all of these hits is because he knows that the opponent's going to keep hitting at 6,000 power, so by taking this life early on, he's doing 2 things actually. He's gaining more cards in his hand so that when he decides to counter, he can counter with the best cards possible, and he's specifically looking for the 10-cost Shanks. 10-cost Shanks being a massive 10-cost 12,000 power rush character in this matchup while reducing the opponent's character's power is going to seriously help out in this matchup. WF isn't in a spot where he has to be afraid of dying on the next turn because he has so much counter in his hand. Though he only has 1 life, even if the opponent decides to split up all of their Dong among their characters and try to go for lethal, WF can survive, and Abao, knowing this, won't even try to attempt this. It's for this reason that WF can force Abao to keep hitting at 6,000 power and try to develop larger characters onto the board like the 8-cost Moria to actually be able to finish out the game, rather than use the characters that are currently on the board to try to finish out the game. This creates a scenario where WF, despite only having 1 life currently, is in a very safe spot thanks to Abao not having strong attackers on the board. Abao, knowing that he needs to develop a stronger board, plays out the 8-cost Moria later on to try to create these stronger hits. But WF is ready using the 8-cost Rayleigh, which can reduce the opponent's characters, which persists on the opponent's turn, making this 8-cost Moria only 6,000 power, forcing the opponent to go for this game plan from the beginning of the game, but not giving him enough attacks to actually be able to break through the wall of defense that WF has set up. Both players recognize that this is going to end up becoming a race, but Abao just doesn't have enough power on the board due to the fact that he was forced into this suboptimal game plan, thanks to the fact that WF took all of his life early on and had the correct cards to be able to stop the opponent from actually punishing his low life total. All of this together over the course of the next couple of turns, WF on Shanks against all odds took down one of the worst matchups for this deck in the 2nd game of the World Finals. He lost the 3rd game, but this was still impressive. He didn't even draw 10-cost Shanks. On the other hand, a deck like Blue Purple Luffy does not meet the other general rule of decks. Blue Purple Luffy is looking to ramp early on, increasing the number of Dolomite he has at his disposal to line his board with 9 to 10,000 power characters as quickly as possible thanks to the 9-cost Sanji. Because Luffy is using the early and mid game just to get to the late game as soon as possible, there are significantly less 5 to 6,000 power attacks, but significantly more 9 to 10,000 power attacks. In these cases, you may actually want to consider defending your life from the early game, as there's a chance that this could be the lowest power that he hits you for the rest of the game. Defend the cheap attack now so you can absorb the larger attack later. There's endless factors and possibilities when it comes to countering within the One Piece card game that I can't possibly fit into one of these small YouTube videos. Hell, I didn't even talk about what specific cards that you should be countering with or what happens when you have counter events. But these topics I do feel will come a lot more naturally with experience with the game rather than me actually explaining it to you verbally. So therefore, if you're still a little bit unsure about these, just try to play a couple of games, try to confer with people who are maybe better than you at the game, and try to get their opinions on whether or not you're making the correct decision in certain scenarios. And even if you don't have ultimately people around you that are going to give you that support, I hope that my video was able to help you regardless of your skill level, being a beginner, intermediate, or maybe slightly more advanced player. Thank you so much for watching this video. This script took about 7 rewrites to write in total. I rearranged topics, cut topics all together so many times, try to make it as digestible as possible, and I hope that that shows. In any case, I hope that you appreciated this video. Maybe consider checking out my sponsor if you did, because that does help me out significantly, because I'll be honest, they're giving me very good money for this, so I appreciate them so much giving me this opportunity, and if you could try them out for me, that would be greatly appreciated as well. I thank you guys so much for supporting me. 28,000 subscribers is an unbelievable number, seriously. I'm getting, we call it chicken skin in Japan, thinking about how crazy that number is, but the sky's the limit. I have some crazy plans in the future which I can't legally disclose yet. Actually, legally can't disclose yet, which I'm very excited to show to you at some point. Honestly, anything that you're thinking of, I think that I have something way more crazy in mind. It helps to be a carpenter with some good friends. So if you're curious to see all the projects that I'm going to build in the future, I hope that you're going to be on this journey with me for a long time. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you guys next time. I love you.